Hello, everyone. My name is Baron Sandlin, and I will be your presenter during this session. And we're glad to be a part of the Child Care Central, their third annual ACE conference, going virtual. And the topic was for this conference is Trauma to Triumph. And during this breakout session, our session topic that we'll be going through and talking about will be childhood trauma with a subtopic dealing with the root of the matter. And during this session, we will discuss many topics dealing with childhood trauma. And some of the session topics will be: what does trauma look like mentally, physically, and emotionally in our children? And trauma does not discriminate, and out of the mouth of babes, and just keep coming, helping our children overcome grief and loss. So these are some of the subjects in discussion that we'll be talking about during this session. And again, we're excited to be a part and to talk about such a topic that is such a vital of importance when it comes to parents, teachers, and any professionals that are dealing with children. It's very, very important. So I did some research, and in all of my experience in dealings with this subject, we will hopefully be able to share some things that will help you. So here's some other questions that that if you would like to look at and ponder as we go through this, and if you have any answers to these, you can definitely jot them down. Hopefully we'll be able to share those with us at a later date as we go through this. So we have 7 different questions. What do we mean by trauma? How does trauma affect people? What can we learn from listening to the voices of people and children who have experienced children? That's a good one that we'll like to discuss later. What can we learn from listening to the voices of individuals and children that has experienced trauma? Why is understanding trauma important in the work that we do at your place of employment? What can we do to ensure that we help those who serve and who have experienced trauma? Why we all matter. The stresses of our own work and lives may also make trauma a personal concern, and how understanding trauma and improving our services helps all of us. Trauma defined. I have some definitions that we have worked through. Childhood trauma is defined as a physical or psychological threat or assault to a child's physical integrity. Listen to that. Physical or psychological threat or assault to a child's physical integrity. That's pretty heavy. Just think of the words itself, threat or assault, when you look at it, but just think about it as a psychological approach. And the sense of self-safety or survival, or to the physical safety of another person significant to the child. And also they have a shorter version to define childhood trauma. It is the experience of an event by a child that is emotionally painful or distressful, which often results in lasting mental and physical effects. And these experiences may occur at any time in a child or person's life. They may involve a single traumatic event, or may be repeated over many years. These trauma experiences often overwhelm the child or individual dealing with their coping resources. This often leads the person to find a way of coping that may work in the short run, but may cause serious harm in the long run. So we will definitely talk about these experiences when it comes to childhood trauma. Again, trauma is a personal, it is personal. It does not disappear if it is not validated. When it is ignored or invalidated, the silent screams continue internally, heard only by the one held captive. So we must make sure that when we come into contact with a child that has experienced some trauma, we must validate it. We must not ignore it. Because when someone enters the pain and hears the scream, that's when the healing begins. So we must enter into that child's experience before the healing begins. Because if we don't validate these experiences with these children, it will only be heard by them, and it can carry on throughout their childhood, preteens into the young adult years until their adult years, and then the end result is pretty tragic. So the next screen talks about the types of childhood trauma. Because we have a short list. It's not to be considered as an exhaustive list of types of childhood trauma. We have some that we would like to kind of go over. Community violence, domestic violence, neglect, physical abuse, school violence, emotional abuse, death of a parent, divorce, family life, rape. So you can definitely go on and on and on. But some of the ones that I would like to give light to that a lot of times we don't think about, because we look at trauma, childhood trauma, as being the physical approaches, violence and kids just being a part of bullying and these things. But what about some of the things that goes along with neglect, from inside the home, neglect, when it comes to lack of discipline, lack of supervision, negative peer influences, and a lack of demonstrated love and affection. These are types of trauma also, when we think that, well, as long as we have a roof over their head and they have some clothing, we're able to feed them. But what about those other aspects that these kids need to be having consistently in their life, such as discipline and supervision and monitoring their kids' negative peer influences, and most of all, a demonstrated love and affection, and that's to be done consistently, in our kids' lives. So this list goes on and on, but we must be able to understand the types of childhood trauma, and of course this list can go on and on and on. There was in my research, we found that there was a California Surgeon General, Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She has an ambitious dream, and it says that her dream is to screen every student for childhood trauma before entering school. And a school nurse would also get a note from a physician that says, here is the care plan for this child's toxic stress. And this is how it shows up. Imagine that we're able to capture childhood trauma as a child enters school. Yeah, it's going to take some work on some others, but look what we're doing. We are ultimately trying to protect the potential. We see these kids and say, wow, they have so much potential, but if they can only be still, if they can only be quiet, they can only focus. But do we understand the underlying issue behind, these kids not being able to focus, not being able to sit still, or, not to distract others? Imagine if we had a care plan for this child from an educator standpoint. We can better be able to articulate a educational plan for these kids if we understood what was going on behind closed doors, in this child's toxic stress environment. We don't know what's going on in the home. But when I saw that, I thought it was an excellent observation and concept that could be used in every school. So I'm not for sure how it's working out there if she actually put it into fruition, but it was definitely an excellent idea. Moving on, my child's behavior patterns. This slide talks more about from a parental standpoint, and parents. Do you understand your child's behavior pattern? Do you know when your child is happy, glad, or sad? Do you know? Because a lot of times we can catch a lot of things early if we just understood our child's behavior patterns. It says here, one of the bullets says, "It is my opinion, trauma in children looks physically like they are in a staring motion, emotionally withdrawn, not very vocal, more like they're stuck." Do we see them? Do we notice when they physically look different? When something is just out of place? A lot of times we get so caught up in our own way of life and selfish ways that we just caught up on self. We don't really see them. We always say, well, when something happens, we always say, I heard a lot of parents say, well, I didn't know. How can you not know when that child lives in your house? You should know when this child is happy, sad, or glad, or something is wrong. You should know. No one should have to come and tell you that something is wrong with your child. You should know. And as an educator, we should not withhold this information. We should let the parents know. If they don't know, we should let them know, hey, look, something is not right. Grades are dropping when this child is an AB student, or this child, does well socially and academically, even early on, there should be some communication early. I cannot say it enough. Early intervention is the key. A lot of kids don't have the words to describe how they feel, so they act out. They say and do things that are abnormal because they're actually crying out for help because they don't understand all of the emotions they're having. I mean, we can't imagine a child that's going through some childhood trauma and don't know how to say how they feel. Maybe they have said some things to the parent or to the teacher and it was ignored. It's like, oh, you'll get through it. But something has happened. So we must take the initiative to investigate, to find out what's going on with this abnormal behavior from this child. If it continues and it continues, we must do something. Someone must take the initiative to act, to find out what's happening. I would rather rule on the side of error on the side of safety. Here's a picture on this slide. As you see, this title, "Do You See Me?" It depicts a picture of a child just staring into the air, into the atmosphere, just gazing. And again, the slide before we had just discussed about my child's behavior patterns and do you see me? And a lot of kids don't have the words to describe how they feel, so they act out. They say and do things that are abnormal because they're actually crying out for help because they don't understand all of the emotions that are going on in your mind. And sometimes they have this stuck look, like, and I can only imagine how exhaustive it could be when they begin to get stuck in this emotional withdrawal phase. So we must pay attention to our kids. We must let them know that we do see them and we do hear them. Out of the mouth of babes. This next slide talks about just keep coming, out of the mouth of babes. And what do we mean by that? It's that they keep coming, reiterating, they keep talking about this issue, they keep coming with you with the same uh, problem that they're dealing with, but it just seems like no one is really listening. So out of the mouth of babes, they're telling us what's going on, either through verbal communication, either through acting out, some sign they're showing you that something is happening. And as parents, as educators in this profession, we should pick up on these signs. We should wonder, okay, this keep recurring. They just keep coming, same thing over and over and over and over again. And we must understand that something is happening, because they're going to tell us what's going on. And these kids, something is happening if they keep telling us the same thing over and over and over again. And so this slide is just to reiterate that, listen, pay attention. If they keep coming with the same thing, if they're the same problems, the same behavior patterns that's happening, we must pay attention to our babies. Again, this next slide is trauma does not discriminate. Age, race, gender, rich or poor, it doesn't matter. Trauma affects everyone, all ages, all races, all gender. I tell you what, if you pinch me and you pinch somebody else that's the same age or a different gender, you're going to feel pain. It's going to hurt. So we must understand that trauma does not discriminate between anyone, any level of experiences of age and race and gender. It affects them across the board. It hits us all. The root, digging even a little deeper. And the acronym for root is the reality of our teaching. And this slide talks about early childhood traumas, those that happen before the age of 6, that lie at the root of most long-term depression and anxiety and many emotional and psychological illnesses. And I have a definition also for what is a bad childhood. I define a bad childhood as knowing that your emotional, physical, and or sexual safety was not guaranteed by your caretakers. Once a child feels unsafe like this, his priority must be managed. His priority must be to manage his parents' feelings and behavior instead of focusing on his own development. Now, once it get to this point where that child understands that, I feel unsafe, I'm not being protected, no one is really taking care of my issues, then they are withdrawn from even telling you, because they understand that if I tell my parents this is the attitude, this is the behavior that I'm going to get from my parents, this is the feeling that they're going to show. So they start managing or your feelings and behavior based off of what they say. And then it becomes, like it says in the slide, it lies at the root and of most long-term depression and anxiety. It's because of the root of the matter. We didn't catch it early enough. So if we understand that a lot of our early childhood trauma, the issue lies at the root, and it's based off of the reality of their teaching, what they're around, their environment, what has been going on, so we must get to the bottom of what's going on with these kids early. We must determine the trauma early. And the only way to get to the bottom of it, we must get to the root. We must dig, and as early as we can catch it through these behavior patterns, we can definitely catch it early. But if it goes on and on and on over the years, then we must stop and understand that we must get to the root of the matter in order to see change. The root of the matter, the essential part or cause of something, as in we still don't understand what happened. We must get to the root of the matter. And this, again, the root of the matter is very essential to what caused something to happen when we see our kids act out. we, when we see them withdrawn and when we see their behavior patterns or something is just going out of control, with the grades and, not focusing in class, we must understand that an essential part of this and what's the cause of it is at the root, so we must get to the root of the matter so we can understand what's going on and what is happening to our children. So again, just understand that concept of just understanding how important it is to get to the root of the matter when it comes to dealing with early childhood trauma, especially when they have gotten into the teenage years and it hasn't been, and that behavior is still going. We need to stop and focus and get to the root of what's going on with our children. Okay, the next slide. What does trauma look like mentally, physically, and emotionally in our children? What does it look like? What does it look like? Anxiety, terror, withdrawal from others, constantly alert, reenactment of situation with various objects, amnesia, poor self-image, bedwetting, guilty feelings. The list goes on and on. So we must understand what does trauma look like mentally and physically and emotionally in our children. So these are short lists. This list is not to be, again, taken as an exhaustive list. And some more, a list of irritability, difficulty sleeping, lack of energy, show signs of obsessive or compulsive behaviors, inability to concentrate. So these are some more signs of what trauma looks like in a kid that's mentally challenged, physically challenged, or emotionally challenged. So we must know what it looks like. So here's some more examples. Effects of trauma in children: difficulty learning, struggling in school, suicide or suicide ideation, the thoughts of taking their life, eating disorders, extreme anger and hostility, and drugs and alcohol. A lot of these are coping mechanism when it comes to the effects of trauma in our children. So if we see these things, we must understand that there's a possibility that something is going on. So these are some effects of trauma. Helping our children overcome grief and loss. In some cases, trauma is not immediately evident. Sometimes trauma does not show up until much later in life or until it is triggered by certain circumstances. So when we begin to help our children overcome grief and loss, we must understand that, a lot of time in these cases, it is not immediately evident. Sometimes, they would become dormant, which they would have a fixed mindset about their traumatic event. They would have a fixed mindset where they feel like they're stuck, like this is never going to change. So I'm just going to submerge it and just cope with it over my life. Then it was become something that it doesn't show up until later in life. And so we must begin to understand how to help our children overcome these things. And a lot of times it's going to take action. It's going to take action in order to begin the healing process. It's going to take action. What is one of the things or a factor that helps that child achieve ultimate success or happiness? And they always say it's one person who was a what? I'll just think on that for a second. I get an answer. A mentor, someone, an advisor. And my definition of a mentor is someone who advises, a coach, a guide, a confidant, a trainer, someone that child has become to trust and believe in and have established a connection with that individual. And I would say the connection through relationship is an evidence-based practice. Connection, connection is the key. And sometimes it takes some time to develop that connection. So you have to be willing to dig in there and keep hope in front of that child until they're able to grab it. And that takes a special person, someone that's not willing to, that's not going to give up on them. So keep hope in front of them until they're able to grab it. And sometimes it takes that special person. Sometimes it's someone that has developed a connection with them over a period of time, such as a mentor. And more solution to helping our kids cope, deal with grief and this trauma experience is we'll begin to develop that connection and that relationship with them. A lot of times we want to give them a goal, but I would say we just let them understand what is their purpose in life. Why were they born? A lot of times they think that, why was they even born for this to even happen? I shouldn't have been born, but we just let them know that they're being born, that they do have purpose and they do have destiny. There's a reason why they was born, so we must help them develop their purpose in life. Focus on their potential. Again, give them hope, let them know that keep that hope in front of them until they're able to grab it. Help them recognize the trauma, demonstrate compassion, love, and understanding. And again, the word connection. I have those two words, hope and connection, in bold for a reason. So those are the key to helping our children overcome trauma. And many live in fear of not connecting or belonging. And so that's how they're, you see a kid that has grown, that has become an adult because they never made a connection with anybody dealing with this. So these are some examples of some solutions when it comes to helping our children overcome trauma. Now, here's a poem that we found. Many of you all may have seen the movie, the Antoine Fisher story, and the poem talks about who would cry for the little boy. And the Antoine Fisher is a simple and moving poem that describes a child's loss of his innocence and need for love. The poem uses a refrain, who would cry for the little boy? And there's the basis for a poem that delves into the heart of a grown man that's still suffering from his youth of trauma. And of course, the poem reads, who would cry for the little boy, lost and all alone? Who would cry for the little boy, abandoned without his own? Who would cry for the little boy, abandoned without his own? Who would cry for the little boy? He cried himself to sleep. Who would cry for the little boy he never had for keeps? Who would cry for the little boy he walked the burning sand? Who would cry for the boy inside the man? Who would cry for the little boy who knows well hurt and pain? Who would cry for the little boy? He died again and again. Who would cry for the little boy, a good boy he tried to be? Who would cry for the little boy who cries inside of me? And so it is something to think about, and just imagine a child who dreams and never sees no physical manifestation of his dreams. And because he said, no one will advocate for me. No one sees me. Who hears my cry? If they hear my cry, what are they doing about it? So just imagine a child who dreams and sees no physical manifestation of it. They have a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, and we must understand that this is a tough time, for that kid. Even as they have moved on to become an adult, they will eventually crash and burn later in life. if their emotions are not let out or released, and if they never releases this thing, we must teach them also the power of forgiving. Because if they hold unforgiveness in their heart, it's almost like drinking the pause and expecting for the perpetrator or the one that did this trauma, expecting for them to die. And of course, you are the one hurt it. So we must teach them how to release it and get beyond it through some of these strategies and things that we have talked about. Give them hope, let them understand purpose, and developing a connection with them. Tell them to never give up. Don't ever give up hope. Don't ever give up hope. Here's a picture of a little boy in the States. Perhaps if tearful little boys were confronted instead of shame, there wouldn't be so many angry men struggling to emphasize with their emotions. And again, it goes back with connection. Needing love, needing comfort, needing affection, needing discipline, needing supervision done on a consistent basis daily. Imagine this kid going through life and never being shown proper love and affection. And we talk about two different types of storms, which is not on the slides, but going back to how they're dealing with this trauma. And I use the example of an inner storm versus an outer storm. And an outer storm, we can describe what the storm is. We can assess the damage. You can tell somebody. You can move and get out of the radius of the storm, of this outer storm. But this inner storm is what's so crucial. That inner storm is hard to describe. You can't really explain it, can't tell anybody. It doesn't matter how fast you go or which direction you go. But when you get to where you're trying to go, that storm will directly be there before you do. Because when you get there, it's there. It never goes away. It goes wherever you go. You can't outrun it. This is this inner storm that we have to work with and deal with to teach them how to deal with this inner storm. Teach them how to describe what's happening, because this must be a difficult process. But everywhere you go, the storm follows you. So this is our job to help them deal with that inner storm. The experience of trauma in childhood and adulthood matters. We can make mistakes when we don't fully understand the role that trauma may be playing in the problems and disappointments of students. Many current problems faced by the children this area may be related to traumatic life experiences. Children who have experienced traumatic life events are often very sensitive to situations that remind them of the people, places, or things involved in their traumatic event. These reminders, also known as triggers, may cause a child to relive the trauma and view us as a source of distress and not as a healing and welcoming environment. So we must understand that these experiences of trauma, in childhood and adulthood does matter. The challenge of topic talks about it is difficult to determine if a particular life problem is related to trauma. If we assume that they're presenting issues are not related to trauma, then we miss a great opportunity to help. If we assume trauma may be playing a role, then we begin to pay attention to signs of trauma and ask the right questions. These steps we take to create a safe, trusted environment benefits everyone. So we must not assume that they're presenting issues are not related to trauma, because it could very well be. And then again, we assume that, and again, like I said, we miss a great opportunity to help. But we must always not assume, but must know that, hey, is trauma playing a role in this issue that will these signs that this child is exhibiting. Because we want to make sure that we're able to tackle this issue and pick up these signs and be able to help this individual move through life dealing with these challenges. Again, how we may unintentionally cause our children to relive their trauma, the importance again of relationships and what hurts versus what helps. What hurts? Interactions that are humiliating, harsh, impersonal, disrespectful, critical, demanding, judgmental. But what helps? Interactions that are expressed kindness, patience, reassurance, calm, and acceptance and listening. Frequent use of words like please and thank you. Asking questions, what hurts? Asking questions that convey the idea that there is something wrong with the child. You know, this is what we must understand, that our attitudes and our beliefs must change. Regarding child's difficulties only as symptoms of a mental health, substance use, or a medical problem. Never thinking about is this issue related to trauma. But again, what helps? Asking questions for the purpose of understanding what harmful events may contribute to current problems. Recognizing that mental health, substance use, and physical health symptoms may be a child's way of coping with trauma. A lot of times when we see the issue with emotional problems, they started substance use, and the physical health, something is changing, the hygiene is changing, something is going on with their physical health. It could be symptoms of where a child is just the way they cope with this trauma. So we must change our attitudes and our belief when it comes to trauma. Again, awareness. We must increase the awareness and knowledge and skills in delivering research-informed treatment services designed to address the cognitive, emotional, behavioral, substance use, and physical problems associated with trauma. We must become aware. We must take this issue serious. If we're in the classroom, or if you are a parent, if you are any type of professional that's dealing with children, if you see any of these symptoms, we must put on the hat that must be is there. Have this child had any trauma experiences? We must be aware. We must know the signs and symptoms. And again, we must be proactive. We must be proactive. And make sure that I don't miss anything. I think we covered the most important parts, but again, this last slide talks about awareness. So we must be aware and must increase our focus on these signs and symptoms. Again, my information is listed here. My email and my number if you need to reach me for anything, any questions about the presentation, you need to forward you the slide, we can. And again, we thank you for attending, and we thank you for listening.